at some point I will trust that they'll be able to get on the bus all by themselves. But I'm still a new 6th grade parent. So. All right, so when last we met, did we get as far as Britain season ships or anything like that?
Yeah.
So we had done this. We had done this.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it was only 6th period that's behind. So basically, to kind of connect ourselves with last time. We started with kind of the building up of the United States and creating a brand new constitution. And it's going to be this group called the Federalists, led by people like George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, that implement this new government. We're going to face a series of crises at that point. And one of the big problems that the United States is going to face is a European war. And Britain, during this European war, is going to start seizing American ships that are trading with the French. We believed we had the right to because we said we were neutral. They believed they had the right to seize our ships because us trading with the French was helping the French, their enemy. Additionally, they would take people off American ships and impress them into the British Navy because the United States had a habit of basically taking anybody on board to join their crews when their ships ran short. And the British were basically punishing us for taking these sailors. Okay? Jefferson, the Republicans, Madison, believed that what Britain was doing is so wrong, it meant that we should ought to go to war with Britain. George Washington does not agree. George Washington knows that the United States is too weak to go to war. So he's going to send this guy by the name of John Jay to try and negotiate some sort of deal with the British. Now, why does he choose John Jay? He's the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Well, John Jay had been on the team that had originally written the Treaty of Paris of 1783. And so he's hoping to kind of build on that relationship. The one person who didn't really trust that Jay would be able to pull this off is actually Alexander Hamilton. And Hamilton is going to do something that on a scale of 1 to shady is kind of shady. Okay. He's going to send an advance message to the British telling them exactly what John Jay is willing to do, not willing to do. His entire bargaining strategy is going to be disclosed to the British. It's a leak. Now, why does Hamilton do this? Well, this is one of those, I mean, it's certainly one of the more confusing things. Why on earth would he do this? The best that we can do is kind of take him at his word. This was his explanation when later, and this is not immediately, but later. He didn't trust that Jay would be able to pull off a deal. In fact, he thought that that John Jay would get into an impasse. And an impasse would mean no agreement. An impasse might mean war. But if John Jay is caught off guard, he's more likely to negotiate an agreement, maybe not favorable to the United States, but we would at least have an agreement. And as long as we had an agreement, that meant the United States could continue to trade with Great Britain, which was the pinnacle or the the most important part of his financial plan was trade and tariffs. And so he knew we had to keep trading. So he, in effect, sabotages Jay to try and make it so we definitely end up with a deal. Now, it's a gamble, isn't it? Could he have known for sure that it would have worked out that way? Oh. Okay, and that's why, obviously, it's controversial, and that's why we kind of think it's a little shady thing for him to have done. Does that make sense, sort of? Anyway, John Jay wins very few concessions from the British. The most important thing they do is they agree that really we mean it this time. We are going to withdraw from our forts in the Old Northwest. And remember, when George Washington came into office, the British were sitting there in those forts of trading with American Indians. The United States couldn't have done anything about it. But now, they are agreeing, and for sure this time, they're going to leave. And this is huge because this is now going to open up the Northwest to the United States. It can actually go there if the British are gone. Yeah?
Why did they leave?
Well, why is that before it was kind of a sticking point. They were angry about the fact that we were not reimbursing loyalists for their land. And so if we're not going to reimburse the loyalists, then we're not leaving either. And so they kind of were stuck on that. Now they've moved on, and they're willing to abide by the Treaty of 1783. Does that make sense? The second thing the British agreed to do is they agreed to pay for some of the shipping damage. Remember, they had taken a whole bunch of ships, a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch of traders. They had taken their ships, they had taken their cargoes. And what the British are going to agree is, well, okay, we'll pay for this one, we'll pay for this one, we'll pay for this one. We'll give you some of your money back. And why? Because these are trading people. Having good trade relations is important to them as well as us. So they're willing to make some payments to make the merchants feel better, if that makes sense. Now, do they agree to stop doing it? No. Do they agree to stop impressing sailors? No. But do they recognize that this is a hardship on the United States to lose the ships? Yes, and that's why they're reimbursing us for some. The Americans will once again agree to basically make sure that anybody who owed money from before the American Revolution to Britain would pay it back. Now here's where, remember, I told you to make a party chart. Okay. And if you think back to that chart you made, there's something about this treaty that seems kind of interesting. Because think about it. The people who get money back, merchants. The people who had to pay, largely southern planters. Main debts owned before the American Revolution for southern planters. And so now think about it. Who does this treaty favor? The Federalists. There's a very political aspect to this treaty. And it will further divide the teams. Okay? Southerners, okay, are saying, boo, boo, boo. Okay? Because they're the ones having to pay here. Merchants who already want to trade, they want to keep on trading, because that's how they make their money, get the addition of even getting paid back. It favors them. Yeah?
How is that a special Federalist thing?
Because the Federalists, so in your chart, which team favored merchants? Which? The Federalists. The Federalists. Okay? And remember that Hamilton's about kind of changing the way that the United States makes its money, making it a commercial nation, making it a trading nation. Whereas Jefferson is about farming. Does that make sense? Jay's treaty will have a secondary benefit that we didn't figure on. It was like a bonus. We went to the bonus round because of the Jay Treaty. You see, once we sign a treaty with the British, the Spanish interpret the Jay Treaty as perhaps the beginning of an Anglo-American alliance. And if there's an Anglo-American alliance, does that strengthen America or weaken it? It strengthens it. And so remember, they're having problems. They're having a disagreement with the United States. Now, when it was puny, United States, whatever. But if it's Anglo-America, wait a minute, maybe we better be on better terms. So because of this relationship now being more stable with Britain, Spain negotiates a treaty with the United States. We call it Pinckney's Treaty. Its actual name, but you don't need to know it, is the Treaty of Friendship, Limits, and Navigation between Spain and the United States. In effect, fear that of a possible U.S.-British alliance makes the Spanish make a deal with the United States. The deal is cool. The United States is now going to be able to navigate freely on the Mississippi River. Even better, we're going to be allowed to use Nolens as a port. The United States is given what is known as a right of deposit in Nolens. What a right of deposit is that river travel and sea travel are two different things that happen on two different types of boats. On river, you can basically stack everything up on a raft and float it down the river and just steer it into port. But you can't do that at sea. So what you needed to do is you needed to take things off your raft and put it down somewhere, bring in your ocean-going vessel, take it off, and put it onto the ocean-going vessel. Well, the Spanish say we can do that without charge, free of charge, in Nolens, a right of deposit. Second thing the United States and Spain agreed to is what is the actual border. And the border involved Florida. The Spanish believed that Florida was Florida. The United States believed that Florida was Florida. What they agree on is Florida. They basically split it. Split the difference. Okay? A compromise. Yeah?
Is the only thing that... So what did the Spanish get from that treaty?
A solid border of Florida.
That's it?
That's the basic. Because, well, that was the thing that created the problem of them closing the port to begin with. They were punishing us because they disagreed with our interpretation of the border. Now that we've solved the border issue, okay, they open us back up to traffic. And then the fact that we have some sort of possibility alliance with Britain, they give us the extra gift of right of deposit. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But in 1896, in effect, all good things are going to have to come to an end. George Washington is going to leave office after 2 terms. Now, I cannot tell you how important this is. There was nothing in the Constitution at that time that said he had to. He could have kept being president if he wanted to. But he recognized that if he did not step down, what does that say about American democracy? Basically, you keep having a president over and over and over again and you don't change. What do you in effect have? A dictator or El Presidente, president for life? Had George Washington not stepped down and he did go for a third term here and he died the same year that he actually did die, he would have died in that third term. In effect, he would have been president for life. Imagine if that had been the precedent. That you basically get to keep being president until you die. Is that a little different than what we have? Yes?
He died the same year he left.
No, he died in 1799.
So he would have.
He would have been in the third year of his fourth term, or third year of third term. Got it? Anyway, so he sets this huge precedent of 2 terms. It remains the 2-term tradition, and it does not get broken until Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who will run and win a 3rd term, and then he shatters the tradition by running and winning a 4th term. We then amend the Constitution and make this now, you have to. Yeah?
But wasn't that during like the dust something?
It was during the Great Depression and World War II.
So that had any effect on it or not?
Well, of course, he thought he was indispensable. He thought that there was nobody who could do it better than him, so he stayed around. Is he right? Well, you know, he was a really outstanding leader. But indeed, he does break this tradition. Afterwards, we decide that we should make this law. And we amend the Constitution, 22nd Amendment, that says 2 terms. Done.
Did he die in his 4th term?
He did die in his 4th term. It was basically a month into his 4th term that he dies. As George Washington leaves, he's going to give us parting advice. Okay? America, I know I'm leaving now, but I'll tell you what, there's something that I have learned that I want you to know. We are too weak to stand on, we are too weak to get involved in European wars. And so therefore, you need to stay out of permanent alliances. And the reason why you got to stay out of a permanent alliance is that if you get yourself into an alliance with a European country, and that European country goes to war, and then the European country loses that war, the very existence of the United States is in jeopardy. So my advice to you, don't do it. Stay away from the Europeans, they're evil. Got it? So as Washington leaves, we can basically say that his contributions, and if you want to think bigger picture here, you might consider it. This is Washington's contributions. It happens during the Washington administration. But you could also say that these are things that happen during the Federalists, when the Federalists are in office. Anyway, when George Washington came into office, okay, Shays' Rebellion, what could the central government do about it? Nothing. Whiskey Rebellion, what can the United States government do about it? Something. Got it? When George Washington came into office, the United States could not utilize the Northwest because the British are there. The Southwest was useless to them because they could not use the Mississippi River. But now that George Washington is leaving office, we have access to the Northwest, we can use the Mississippi River. The West is now useful. When George Washington came into office, we could not negotiate commercial treaties. Our trade was basically at a standstill. But largely thankful to Alexander Hamilton's financial plan, its regulation of commerce with tariffs, we now have trade. And then finally, George Washington does something which is rare, particularly after last night, rare. That a president can go 8 years and not go to war. Okay? A president can be president for 8 years and not go to war. Yeah. Basically, the United States committed to that we're going to start bombing in Syria and Iraq, sometimes known as war. Anyway. Against the Islamic State, ISIL. Anyway, so ISIS or ISIL. Depends on the day. So that's George Washington, and by the way, historians, based on writings and descriptions of George Washington, or about George Washington, they basically believe that this is actually one of the best portraits of him. When I look at it, I of course look at his eyes, and I think of there was a song from the 70s, Sad Eyes. I just go, whoa. You don't like that one? It's creeping you out, isn't it?
It doesn't look very heroic. Because it doesn't look like that one. I like this one.
No, it doesn't.
And
they would say that this one was more accurate than that.
No, I don't like that one.
You like this guy. You want heroic Washington.
Yeah.
You want Washington!
That's not important.
All right. So, what I'd like you to do right now is to evaluate what is Washington's most important achievement. And you want to step it up a notch. You think of it maybe not just as Washington, put in parentheses, the Federalists during Washington's term. Okay, Federalists during Washington's term. Just in case on the test it doesn't say Washington, it says Federalists, you'll know that it's in effect kind of the same thing at this point. Finish the sentence you're writing. And go find your White House and share with them. What do you think?
I said,
yeah, I put like creating strong powers and credit and like commerce credit. I feel like economy is the central government regulation, and then to make sure that we were strong enough to take care of ourselves before foreign affairs.
big. Is that what is that?
So on the line, rewatch the lecture.
Everyone's watching
Well, are you going to be doing it this class pretty much?
That's what you think. Just because.
All right, 10 seconds. 5, 1. Was it a quick 5? I didn't do nothing specific. Get it. All right. Okay. All right. So Edie, what's your name? Excellent. Okay. Yeah.
I said that staying out of war has allowed the central government to become more stronger.
Okay.
Stronger, yeah, stronger. More strong.
Stronger. Just stronger.
Stronger, yeah.
Just stronger. Okay. If I'm going all grammar police and everything. Jason.
I said developing a strong, unified central government to handle internal problems.
Okay, so I think you're kind of getting it. And then the one last thing that I just want to make sure you do is that you have this in your brain kind of both ways. Washington, but also remember that this is the Federalists in general would be attributed to these things that happened. In 1796, we're going to have our first contested election, and it's going to be kind of a funny one because it's two people that had signed the Declaration of Independence, helped write the Declaration of Independence, and they had been former BFFs. Okay, the second F didn't work so well. They're not doing so well. Okay. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Jefferson would be more of his agrarian ideas. Adams is closer, of course, to President Washington, with being more in the commercial interests and things like that. Though he did despise Alexander Hamilton, pretty much everyone. Adams is going to win. It was largely because in New England, which had a good chunk of electoral votes, because it was a more highly populated area, it voted solidly for Adams. It gives him the victory. But it was only by 3 electoral votes. And thus, is it as decisive as it had been under George Washington? Is it everybody coming together type of thing? Or is this a squeaker? Is it close? The other weird thing is that under the old rules, this changes in basically, it takes 2 amendments to get it right, the 11th and 12th amendments. But under the old rules, the ballots for the president and vice president are basically the same. Each elector was given 2 ballots, and they got to choose. You got to use each of. I'm going to use one of my votes here, one of my votes there, and then whoever got the most votes as president, one of the second most votes got to be vice president. And so it created this awkward situation where you ended up with people that are in effect rivals, okay, as president and vice president. Okay, so if you don't think that's awkward, think of it being Obama-Romney, okay, and whether or not that would have worked. And so so Adams wins, but Jefferson kind of had a realization soon after his loss. Maybe it's a rationalization, but I think we could actually call it a realization. In show business, who do you never want to follow? The star. Because how are you going to look in comparison? Like that. So now think of it politically. Do you want to follow George Washington?
No.
Do you want to be the one coming after, you know, everything you do? People are like, George Washington wouldn't have done it that way. I don't think George Washington. You're no George Washington. Whoa. It is not really the thing you want to do. And Jefferson figures this out, that in effect, maybe it was good that he lost. And then there was a second thing. Adams is going to write a letter to his former BFF. Okay? And what he's going to do is he's going to invite Thomas Jefferson basically to work with him as a partner, as a team. Together. So remember, do they see things the same way anymore? So think about it. Someone who now you very much disagree with has now said, let's be a team. So Jefferson takes the letter to his new BFF, James Madison. And he says to James Madison, what should I do? What advice do you think James Madison gives to Jefferson?
Use it.
Use it.
Exploit it.
Exploit it. Okay. That is it. Wait. No, it's good. It's good. But what do you think it actually is going to be? Don't do it. Step away. Because here's the thing. If you're predicting that this person is going to fail, right? What would happen if you're attached to failure? You fail too. Do you want to fail too? Or, now this is maybe the better exploiting part, you use the fact that they fail so that next time you win. And that's what Jefferson does. Doesn't mean he's not vice president. It just means that he's not going to hang out with Adams. He basically is just going to be president of the Senate, chair of the Senate, and he's going to do nothing really to do with the administration. Does that make sense? Anyway, as Jefferson predicted, isn't he pretty? As Jefferson predicted, very soon after John Adams takes office, then the problems begin. And the problems basically are surrounding, the problems are basically involved with France. You see, France believed that our signing of the Jay Treaty was in effect creating an alliance between the United States and Great Britain, which was a violation of the Treaty of 1778. And that, we needed to be punished. And so now to punish the United States, what did British do to get our attention? Seize our ships. So guess what the French are going to do? Seize our ships. And so they start taking American merchant ships, much as the British have. So, John Adams says to himself, what would George Washington do? And George Washington had sent John Jay, so John Adams is going to send his own envoy, okay? One of which was Charles Pinckney, to meet with the French, most particularly the French Foreign Minister, Talleyrand. Okay, so if you don't know who that is, Talleyrand was the foreign minister. But when the American delegation arrives in France, France kind of has a bureaucracy. And if you want to deal with the French bureaucracy, it's a little bit of pay to play, all right? You want to work your way up the chain of command, if you want to talk to my boss, you know what you got to do? You got to pay me some cash. And so it basically became known that in order to have any sort of deal with the French, the United States was going to have to pay. Well, what attitude do you think the Americans take to having to pay to negotiate? Oh, God. I'm here to negotiate and you want money? We are so insulted. But here's the problem. By not paying, by not playing, we're not playing. Which means we're not negotiating. Which means that negotiations are breaking down. Which leads to an undeclared war between the United States and France. It's largely a naval war. What the United States will do is we will authorize our merchant ships to become privateers and seize French ships. The French were already seizing American ships, so here we're doing a lot of ship seizing going on. Okay, so we're in a conflict. Most history books call it the undeclared war. A few historians like to dramatically call it the quasi-war. As in quasi-war, quasi-not war, you know? Quasi-war. Here in America, the quasi-war is going to create some craziness. I'm not sure if you've ever noticed that when the United States decides that somebody's our enemy, we go all in. Okay, we go, whoa! Now we hate ISIS now. We hated Saddam Hussein. We hated the terrorists. We hated the communists. We go way in every time that we declare somebody to be an enemy. We decide at this point that we're in this undeclared war that we need an army again. So of course, if we need an army again, who do we need? George Washington. So we say, George Washington, come save us. And so we bring back George Washington to be the commander of the United States Army. We start building ships, a really cool ship. It still exists. USS Constitution is built around this time. Because we really need to protect ourselves against this giant French threat. The French are coming, OMG, the French are coming, okay? Turns out, the French weren't really coming. The foreign minister for France, Talleyrand, realizes that, okay, so he's looking at the scorecard. He looks at the column where it says Friends of France, and he sees that it's kind of blank. And he looks at the column that says Enemies of France, and he sees like World. And maybe lessening the enemies of France list is a good idea. Especially if all you have to do is say, yeah, okay, we'll talk and you don't have to pay me money. So Talleyrand infers better treatment of our ambassadors or envoys. And once again, if you're not, put a notation that he is the foreign minister if you don't know who he is. Eventually, this leads to a negotiation that gets as high as Napoleon, where we have peace. It's known as the Convention of 1800. The United States and France decide that shooting at each other is not a good idea. Got it? All right, so this is the big foreign stories. Everyone got kind of this big foreign story picture in your brain? Okay? Now the other thing I want you to have in your brain as we're talking about the foreign story is I want you to think of the panicky thing that Americans do when we're now at war, or think we're at war. Okay, we've built up the army, we've built up the Navy, we've called George Washington out of retirement, sorry George. Well, there's one other thing we do. Okay? we pass laws that in effect violate people's constitutional rights. Now again, this is a habit that the United States has. It's not a good one. We did it during this non-war. We did it during the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus by sending troops into Maryland, despite the fact that Maryland had not seceded from the Union. In World War I, we passed the Espionage and Sedition Acts, basically giving us the ability to round up suspects that were particularly German during World War I. In World War II, we interned Japanese Americans, people that were born in the United States, and put them into camps. It's a thing that happens when we're panicking and we feel threatened. Well, during this anti-French frenzy, the Federalists will drive these laws known as the Alien and Sedition Acts. Usually people say Alien and Sedition. Your textbook throws in a Naturalization Act as one of the things. I think most people just simply are going to go with Alien and Sedition. The Alien Act is aimed at recent immigrants. And what cover do they use to be able to target recent immigrants? Because where may some of those recent immigrants be from? France. There could be like secret French agents out there, people. Beware the French. Be scared. Okay? And so what these laws are going to do is it's going to make it harder for an alien, and really the word alien just simply means you're not a citizen, okay? It's going to take a longer time for someone to move from what is known as an alien to becoming a citizen. It had been kind of a customary 5 years. The Federalists make it 14 years. You have to live in the United States 14 years before you can become a citizen. During that entire time, you have alien status. And as an alien, it's going to be easier to jail you or deport you. So 14 years, okay? The United States government can say, out. Okay, jail. Okay? For 14 years. Now again, why can they pass this? Well, everyone's all crazy. Oh, French alien. Okay. They get this thing passed. The second law they pass is known as the Sedition Act, which sedition basically, it was illegal to criticize the president or the government. It's illegal to criticize the president or the government. One more time. It's illegal to criticize the president or the government. Now, who is this aimed at? Well, it was aimed at Republican newspaper editors who, now back then, newspapers didn't pretend that they weren't biased. They didn't say we're fair and balanced or anything like that. What they said is we are the New Jersey Republican. And guess what the New Jersey Republican says? The Republicans are awesome, the Federalists suck. Meanwhile, the Trenton Federalist will say, Federalists are awesome, Republicans are up. Okay? You knew pretty much from the masthead which side it was on. So this one targets Republican newspaper editors if they dare criticize President Adams or acts of the government, off to jail. 10 newspaper editors are tried and convicted under this law. Now, I know a lot of you are going, wait, there was amendments. There was an amendment. An amendment said no, can't do that. No, amendment. Remember? Amendment. Well, the Constitution put that protection in. But who enforces it? The federal government, the Federalists. And the Federalists, okay, controlled everything. They were in charge of Congress, they controlled the presidency, they controlled the courts. It's all Federalists, all the time, Federalist channel. So if they like these laws, guess what? They be the laws. Does that make sense? All right, so you kind of get the atmosphere of what's going on here. Okay, people are using this frenzy, this anti-oh my God frenzy, as cover to pass these very restrictive laws. But let's say you didn't like them. Let's say you did want to protest them. Where's your avenue? What do you do? Where can you say something? You can't put it in the newspaper. In Congress, when you complain, it just leads to knockdown, drag-out fights in the floor of the House of Representatives. They literally had a fight in Congress over this law. Involved clubs and the irons from taking the logs off in the fireplace. Okay. Someone got me. Jefferson and Madison figure out another place to protest. They choose state legislatures. They choose state legislatures. Now think about it. What they do is they write up what they believe are the crimes being committed. And they have their friends in the state legislature of Virginia and the state legislature of Kentucky, new state Kentucky, to protest these laws. Now think about it. They protest the laws, they criticize the government. Is the United States government going to send troops into the floor of the Virginia legislature to arrest people? Or would that be exceedingly bad? Exceedingly bad. And so they were able to use, they felt that this was a safe haven to make their critiques. Does that make sense? So they passed these resolutions. They're penned by Jefferson and Madison, but they're passed by the Virginia and Kentucky legislatures. And first thing they say is, ick, bad Alien Sedition Acts. No, bad Alien Sedition Acts. But then they go a step further. They're critical of the fact that here we are, we're supposed to have a system that has these protections, rights, but these rights aren't being protected. And so what they're going to do is they're going to propose a way that if the government acts poorly, as they have in this case, that we could have a remedy or a way of fixing it. Does that make sense? We call their solution, okay, the compact theory. Okay? We call their solution the compact theory. Now, what the compact theory basically is based on is an alternative universe view of what the Constitution is. Okay? So in our view, it's a strong central government, right? We the people. In this alternative universe, what the Constitution is simply a compact of sovereign states. A compact, a grouping of sovereign states. And if you use the word sovereign, what's sovereign? I'm sovereign. What's sovereign? Sovereign. All right, tell me. Sovereign, 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 sovereign.
I don't know.
You don't know. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, I might know, but I'm just really tired. So.
Oh, okay. I'm taking mine. All right. Anyway, so let me. What's sovereignty? What's sovereignty? Yeah, you're in charge. Okay, you're in charge. You're the sovereign, the king, the sovereign. So what they argued is sovereignty came from the states, as opposed to where? The central government. And if the sovereignty came from the states, that means that if I'm in charge and I gave you a little bit of power, what can I do? I can take it back. The way that Jefferson and Madison proposed that states could take back the power is by basically judging a law as to whether or not it passes the outlines of the Constitution. And if it doesn't, if it falls outside the rules of the Constitution, a state would have the right to nullify said law. So just think about it. If every state had like a veto, anytime a law came onto the books, the state go, zap, no, don't like that one. Boom, got it. All right? They could zap any law. What would happen to a lot of laws? What would happen to almost all laws? Yeah, it wouldn't get passed. But for Jefferson and Madison, what they're thinking about is, wait, look what happened. They passed a really bad law and nobody's doing anything about it. We need to have a protection. Nullification. Now, by the way, this is a very important concept, particularly for this semester. Because when we get to the American Civil War, alternative revisionist historians will tell you that the Civil War was not about slavery. It was about this. That the federal government does not have in effect the right to tell the states to do certain things. That there are states' rights. Okay? As opposed to it being about slavery. States' rights to have slavery. Not slavery. Now the Federalists will argue that the way we keep the federal government in line is through the court system. The problem is it hadn't happened yet. So the Federalists say, well, what? It's the courts. The courts are going to do it. The courts are our check, our balance. But the problem is, with these laws, which many people clearly believe to be a violation, the courts have done nothing. Got it? Yeah?
This is not a time like before judicial.
This is, well, the judicial exists. It's passed. It just is all Federalists all the time. And they are not striking down these laws. Does that make sense?
They're not, are they like an official part of the screen?
They are part of the, well, official, what does that mean? Well, we're going to talk more about how judicial review works next class period. So maybe that will clarify. All right, so very quickly what I want you to do, I want you to explain this theory in your own words. It's an important one. It's a touchstone for the first semester as far as what powers the government has or does not have. It has a lot to do with possible causes of the Civil War. It has a lot to do with a crisis that hits the United States in the 1930s, 1830s, pardon me. It's one of those things you gotta know. Bless you. So how are you going to remember it? Compact theory. Compact theory. What you're going to do to make sure that if I asked you to explain this, you could explain it. turn to the person right next to you and tell them how you're going to remember the concept. Right?
Every day. The first day has
So what they believe is that when they constructed the Constitution, that the checks and balances of the federal government was within the federal government. That's why we have the separation of powers. So that was how they thought it was supposed to be. Does that make sense? The only flaw at that point was that nobody had ever done it yet. So it was not supposed to, but it had to happen. Does that make sense? Right, but they also believe that the government, the way that the court system was supposed to be working, that judges were supposed to be appointed for life, and therefore above the day-to-day politics.
Once the president got elected.
It's not so much that big was balanced to fix these problems. Does that make sense? Whereas Republicans are worried because, well, it hasn't happened. Does that make sense? All right. Stop. So our last thing today. The rematch. Okay. In 1800, we have a rematch for the presidency, and for the first time ever, and the last time ever, you have the sitting president versus the sitting vice president for the presidency. President Adams versus Vice President Jefferson for the presidency. But in this election, we're still under the old rules, where each elector is given 2 votes. And the Republicans are going to organize. We're going to make sure that when our electors place their vote, they know what their instructions are. So rather than maybe splitting your vote, you know, okay, I'll vote for Jefferson, maybe Pinckney, and maybe Adams, all these random people. With the Republicans saying, no, we are going to have party discipline. And this is what we are going to do. You are going to use one of your votes for Thomas Jefferson for president. And the other vote will go to Aaron Burr. He's a party organizer in New York. He has been good for the party. That is who your vote is to be for. Jefferson Burr. 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 And they did it. All the electors followed their instructions. They all voted for Jefferson and Burr. Oops. Because the votes were equal. And what ends up happening is in your brain you're putting one vote for president and one vote for vice president, but the reality is both votes were for president. And you end up creating a tie between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr for president. Oops. And so now, you have a kind of a constitutional crisis. What are you supposed to do if you have a tie? Fortunately, our Constitution has a solution. If you have a tie or a failure to get a majority in the Electoral College, it goes to the House of Representatives. Woo! where it goes. Well, here's the problem. This is the House of Representatives still controlled by the Federalists. So it's the Federalist-controlled House that will decide which of these two Republicans wins. To add further confusion, the vote is done by delegation. All the representatives from New York will vote for one New York vote. All the representatives from Pennsylvania will vote for the one Pennsylvania vote. And what ends up happening is because of this kind of confusing little system, when they voted again, they ended up with a tie again. And when they voted again, tie. What about again? Tie. Let's take the day off and vote the day after that, tie. Let's vote 3 times in a row, tie. Let's vote in the morning and then at night, tie. 35 times they voted, 35 times they tied. It's messy. So messy that in the state of Pennsylvania, the state legislature will vote to authorize the state militia to march on Washington, because it's now Washington, attack the Capitol if Thomas Jefferson was not named President of the United States. Scary times. But there's a hero. And the hero was actually Jefferson's rival, Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton will go meet with a whole bunch of Federalists who had been voting for Aaron Burr. Why? Because they hate Jefferson. We all hate Jefferson, so we're voting for Burr. It makes sense. Well, Alexander Hamilton is from the same state as Aaron Burr. And he knows that, well, Burr, he is a scoundrel. And he convinces several of these Federalists who had been voting for Burr to just not vote, to abstain. And that allows the people voting for Jefferson to prevail. And thus Jefferson becomes the 3rd president of the United States. Repeat after me. Scoundrel. Jefferson will call this election the Revolution of 1800. The reason is it is a peaceful transfer of power. Historically, it truly is one of the first. A lot of people like to say, no, it was a glorious revolution, Mr. King. There actually was an attempt to restore King James. And there were nasty little fights that happened in Ireland for this attempted restoration. A lot of Irish people died. So unless you discount the death of Irish people, the Glorious Revolution is not bloodless. Okay? Anyway, this is truly a peaceful transfer of power. You have this side that controls the House, the Senate, the presidency. They have all the power. And they say, oh, you guys won. Thank you. Have a nice day. And they leave. Now, if you think, well, that's what's supposed to happen in an election, of course that's what's supposed to happen in an election. It just doesn't all the time. Oftentimes you have an election where a team wins, we win, yay! And the other team says, well, that's nice, we have the guns. We still have the guns. If you don't go away, we'll arrest you. Right? In this revolution, Jefferson is going to make changes. First of all, no Sedition Act. Why? Well, actually, the Federalists had it expire. Why do you think they had it expire? Well, just in case they lost. Did they want the Republicans to be able to have the power of the Sedition Act? Are you kidding me? Secondly, they changed the number of years it takes to become a citizen back to 5 years. Thirdly, they look at all the things that Alexander Hamilton had proposed, all the things that they hated, all the things that they said were wrong, and they only pick one of them to change. The hated whiskey tax. They get rid of the whiskey tax, But they keep the bank, they keep the tariff, they keep everything. They just get rid of the whiskey tax. In fact, what they do, instead of destruction, they reduce. They reduce the size of government. They reduce the scope, what government does. They want a more limited federal government. They don't blow it up. They cut around the edges. So what stays the same? Everything else. Basically, Jefferson did not destroy everything that came before it, basically cementing the peaceful transfer of power. But Jefferson will say, we are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. And in closing, basically what Jefferson does is he actually ensures the power of the Republican Party by basically co-opting all of the Federalist ideas and effectively making the Federalists irrelevant. Have a fabulous weekend, unless I see you tomorrow for the film, which you can still have a good weekend, but I will tell you again to have a good weekend tomorrow.